This is the Maruti Suzuki Swift, one of the first properly desirable but affordable hatchbacks to have landed on our shores. As enthusiasts, we welcomed it with open arms way back in 2005. And since then, 2 generations later, it still remains quite sought after. Now I know almost everybody from your boring neighbor to your bothersome, irritating, secretary in the building might own a Swift. It is, after all, one of the highest selling cars in the country. But that doesn't mean that it's not a fun to drive car. And that's one of the reasons that it is here on Carwale's Driver Car series, a series wherein we take affordable everyday cars, not necessarily the fastest, but cars that have great driver connect, and we spend a fun day with them. The Maruti Suzuki Swift is that car. The Swift is powered by a 1.2-litre 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine. It makes 82 bhp and 130 Nm of torque. The engine is mated to a 5-speed manual gearbox, which then drives the front wheels. The mechanicals of the Swift are pretty run-of-the-mill. It runs McPherson struts up front and a torsion beam rear axle for suspension. It has discs at the front and a set of drums to handle the braking duties, and the steering is an electrically powered one. As for the wheels and tires, it runs a hefty set for its size and power. The Swift ZXi we have here runs 185 section rubber on 15-inch alloy wheels. And in case you're wondering, the Maruti Suzuki Swift price is listed at a little under 8 lakhs on the road, and it goes up against the likes of the Hyundai Grand i10 and the Ford Figo. And if we include different body types, the Renault Triber and the Tata Tigor as well. And now that the introductions are complete, let's drive. Agreed. The Swift's engine isn't the most powerful or very powerful in that sense. It makes under 90 horsepower, makes a little over 110 Newton meters of torque, so figures nothing to write home about in that sense. But you don't always need a really powerful engine or a powerful car for it to be fun to drive. Yes, the engine must have some basic characteristics. It needs to be easy revving. It needs to have enough grunt to pull you out of corners instead of you stamping on the throttle and then waiting at corner exits for you need all of that. And you need an engine that sounds nice. The Swift's 1.2, well, it is that engine. Now the engine starts to build power at around 3000 RPM, the grunt, but the sweet spot for it would be between 4 to 6, and it sounds really nice there. It doesn't take effort to get there, so you can keep it there, and the higher you go up on the rev range, the nicer or more precise, more alert the throttle response gets. So you can control the car on throttle, and instead of having to use a lot of brake or be inconsistent with what it's doing. Those are the good points about the Swift's engine. Now it's not turbocharged, it's a naturally aspirated engine in today's day and age where almost everybody's got a turbocharger, but for what the car can do, I think it's more than acceptable. A more powerful engine would always be welcome, but where it is now, it's still quite an involving motor. It's quite an involving setup. So, and the good thing is that because you don't have a lot of power, you won't, get yourself in trouble. Now we're on a wet road today. We don't have the newest of tires on the car, so every time we, get on the gas to exit corners, it starts to wheel spin and understeer, but it's a lot easier to control because of the lack of power. And so that connect is there, that adjustability is there. So if you're new to driving or if you just like driving, I think this engine, it's not a reason not to buy the Swift. I think it's a good setup to have. Now the gear shifts on the Swift are again very good. The gear shifter falls easily to hand. Every time you shift, it falls. It's pretty precise. Could it be more precise? Maybe a little, but you never really find yourself struggling to find a place to put the gate. So it's quite well defined, and it's nice to use. It's an involving experience. So you just keep going up and down the gearbox even though you don't need to, and you don't need to because even though we're going up a little, there is decent grunt in the engine if you're at about 4,000 RPM. But because it's so nice, you keep just like shifting up and shifting down. So it's good fun. And then you've got the floor pedals. They're nicely spaced. So every time you make a downshift, you can heel and toe, which again feels good. The travel for the brake, the travel for the clutch, the travel for the throttle again isn't so much, so you can easily balance and you can move your feet around there. And overall, the gear shift experience complements this engine note, the engine, the way it revs, all of that. And overall, it's a very nice, likable type package. Sometimes you end up wondering when manufacturers can do so well when it comes to engine, when it comes to gearboxes, when it comes to handling, braking, but they just won't get the steering right. Now, on the Swift, again, if I were to talk about its response, I think it's a reasonably quick steering. It has predictable response, but it's completely mute. So there's absolutely no feedback coming in, and off the center it's quite vague, so you have to dial in quite a bit before it clicks into place, if you could say that, and then of course the car starts to react to the steering like you want it to. The other thing that I don't like about the Swift steering is the lack of returnability. So now in most steerings, when you turn the steering, it's expected to go back on its own. This doesn't. So every time you turn it, it doesn't. So you have to pull it back. And it just feels artificial to have something like that. And because otherwise this is a nice, compact, playful car. And steering is a big part of that setup. And that's where maybe Swift needs some some push, but you can get used to it. You do get used to it. It might not. It's still fun, but imagine if the steering was alert and crisp and feedback rich. Then the whole driving experience would have been so much nicer, so much more involving. But yeah, I guess you can't have everything. The Swift, as is obvious, is a small car, and it's also a pretty light car. It weighs maybe a little under 900 kgs, and that means when it comes to twisting roads like these, well, it is a lot of fun. So the thing with the Swift is, and we'll split it into 3 bits. We'll split it into the turn-in, we'll split it into mid-corner balance, and then we'll talk about how it feels like on exits. Turn in now, but a little sort of just want to tell you that we don't have a brand new car, and we're running on tires that are slightly short. Slightly, by slightly we mean they're almost 30,000 kilometers, and so we'll have an experience now what the car feels like, and then of course if it feels different to what we had felt when we drove newer versions or the newer versions of the Swift, we'll bring that into perspective as well. So let's start with turn-in, and even with these tires, the Swift's turn-in it's almost like it's just pulls you into the corner. It's like a magnet is attracted towards metal iron, that sort of thing. So very, very sharp turn-in, very predictable turn-in, and even with these tires, even there's a hint of understeer when you enter. Also the roads are a little wet, but on newer tires it just it just digs in and pulls, and you're there, and that in itself helps you set up for the corner really well. And if you don't manage to do that, well, then mid-corner balance on the Swift is good too. You can leave it the way it is, or like now you can just do a little bit of lift of oversteer, and the tails comes out a little bit, the front tucks in. So if you find yourself running wide, all you got to do is just get off the throttle a little bit, and it just pulls in nicely. If you think that you are maybe a little too tight into the corner like we are now, so get on the throttle. It'll maybe it slides a little, not a lot. The front will, you can hear it, will start moving, washing out a little bit, but it's very, very controllable, because the higher you are in the rev range, the better control you have with the throttle, and that's how the Swift reacts really well to all of that. Now we've spoken about this probably, but a nicer steering would have been such a like a icing on the cake, because here, even though you don't need to dial in a lot, but sometimes you do need to, which a quicker steering would have just made it nicer. More feelsome steering would have made it nicer, but I guess we've said that again and again. But yeah, lovely handling, very involving, very exciting, very playful, good fun. Now when it comes to braking, the Swift runs solid discs at the front, it runs drums at the back. In terms of feel and feedback and bite, I think the brakes work well. Now today we've got slightly wet roads, we've got tires that are not at their best, and so we find that the ABS is kicking in a little too soon. But otherwise you can lean on the brakes quite a bit before the ABS starts to kick in. So that allows you to go deeper into corners, carry some amount of braking into corners, gives you that confidence that you're not overcooking something, or even if you do, you'd still manage to get out of that situation. So I would say braking wise, there's no real complaint in that sense. I like the Swift. It's affordable, it's good value, and when you're in the mood for it, it's also good fun to drive. Now, we would have liked better steering, a steering that was more alive, you had better feedback, it was probably quicker off the center, and we would have liked newer tires, a perkier suspension. But even with these handicaps, I think the Swift was thoroughly enjoyable. The engine, nice sounding, easy revving. Then you've got the gearbox, lovely shifts, crisp shifts. They fall into place. It's very easy to, the gear shifter also falls easily to hand. And then you've got this whole set of pedals, all three pedals that fall beautifully to your feet. So it's very easy to heel and toe. All these things just add towards making a car a good, friendly, fun driver's car. But of course, let's not forget the handling bit, which is what is probably the highlight of the Swift. Now the Swift's a light car, it's a short, small car, so it's very easy to throw around. I think we've touched upon that in the previous part of the film. But I like the fact that the turn-in is crisp, it's quick, and then you can adjust the car mid-corner. You're also never thinking, oh, I don't have enough power exiting corners. So overall, you spend a day around tight twisties, around a 2-lane winding road, maybe a little faster, and you realize you've had a great day, you're smiling. So a good fun car this. And the best part is you never are going to feel guilty about it, because your family's never going to disown you for buying something, because like I said at the start, affordable, great value.